Before I begin, full disclosure, Yooka Laylee is a game that I personally backed on Kickstarter. My name is even in the credits. If this affects how you see this review, then so be it. With that out of the way, let's get into it. What began as a hopeful jaunt through Yooka Laylee's opening worlds quickly devolves into a joyless slog made more frustrating by the amount of potential the game clearly exhibits throughout. There are so many great elements in Yooka Laylee that it's more disappointing than anything that these are attached to a sparse, often clunky experience that continually feels like it's wasting your time. As a spiritual successor to the Banjo-Kazooie series, Yooka Laylee follows the titular anthropomorphic heroes as they adventure through various worlds collecting random objects. In Yooka Laylee, pages are the object of the day, as these pieces of the reality-altering one book have been stolen away by the power-hungry capital B. As far as motivation for embarking on this adventure goes, Yooka Laylee is fine, but it lacks the personality of the games that inspired it. It can be summed up nicely as, hey look, collectibles, go get them. Which is fine, I guess, but it makes getting invested sort of difficult. I know I'm harping on about the story in a 90s throwback collect 'em up, but at least Banjo had his sister to go save. You barely even interact with the evil capital B, which makes any conflict between the heroes and villains tenuous at best. Although the game doesn't do much with them, I will say that Yooka Laylee has some pretty strong character designs. The titular duo managed to look like proper 90s era mascot characters, though put side by side with some of their more iconic contemporaries, they come off as a bit plain. Truly the highlight of the game's character designs is a snake who wears pants, named Trouser, naturally. Though that's not to say that there aren't some low points, like the disposable grunts that you'll find attacking you at every turn, or the enemy that is literally a pair of googly eyes that can possess other objects. The rest of the game's visual design elements are serviceable, but beyond the first two worlds there's a noticeable shift in focus that loses much of the game's charm. Most of the worlds are at least visually distinct and exciting to initially explore, but where the early worlds, the tropical jungle world in particular, feel dense, tightly packed and bursting with character, the remainder of the game feels too big for its own good. The later stages feel too open and feel like they contain the same level of actual content as these earlier, smaller stages. The game's audio design is a similarly mixed bag, as its sound effects and soundtrack offer a comparable level of quality to the games that inspired it, but lack any distinct personality of their own. The work produced by Grant Kirkhope and other Rareware veterans is still catchy and gives off a suitably quirky vibe, but if I closed my eyes you could tell me that I was just playing Banjo-Kazooie, and I'd probably believe you. Even the way characters talk is delivered in the same grunting fashion as the Banjo series, which feels like it lacks the charm that it had back in the day. It doesn't help that Laylee's talk grunts in particular are really breathy and off-putting. It just sounds kinda creepy. With so much effort put into recreating what made the Banjo-Kazooie games great, it's kind of disappointing to find that Yooka Laylee comes up short in so many ways. Beyond the sound design that sticks way too close to the Banjo framework and levels that peak far too early, Yooka Laylee is often frustrating to play, owing to unresponsive controls and sections that quickly outstay their welcome. At its core, Yooka Laylee is an adequate platformer. Its controls aren't quite as responsive as you might hope, making some of the more precision necessary sections a real pain to play, but more often than not it's simply okay. Not awful, not great, just okay. However, sections that require some precise timing and accurate execution rear their ugly heads more often than the subpar controls would have you hoping. Boss fights are a particular offender in these situations, as they usually last about 3 times longer than you'd say was necessary. Regular challenges, such as the minecart sections, also tend to last way longer than they need to, and somehow control worse than the moment-to-moment platforming. Every jump just feels so laggy, it's awful. Having the camera freak out regularly doesn't help anything either. Mercifully, the most frustration I got from Yooka Laylee was from the aforementioned boss and minecart sections, and although they may feel like they occupy a large portion of the game, these sections don't actually make up the majority. Well, except for that camera. You're stuck with that bastard forever. When the game isn't pitting you against cheap, inconsistent bosses or having you pilot a laggy minecart, it's fairly inoffensive. To its credit, Yooka Laylee does provide a steady stream of new moves to spice up the moment-to-moment platforming. While these aren't always the most interesting, they're generally satisfying to use and offer a good sense of progression, as they often open up new areas. And what's more, most of these abilities are easy or intuitive to use, aside from the flight ability which makes me feel like I'm playing while drunk. The only thing that bothers me more than how poorly much of the game controls is how much the game doesn't tell you until after that information would be useful. I spent far longer than I should have on at least one challenge because the game hadn't told me you could manually aim projectiles. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Yooka-Laylee often just doesn't tell you any relevant information until it's no longer relevant. There are plenty of smaller gripes that bug me about Yooka-Laylee as well. For instance, the ability to change your physical properties by licking items is a cool idea, but the fact that these changes have such a small time limit attached to them makes using them frustrating, especially when you combine them with the so-so platforming controls. The various forms that the heroes can be morphed into are also cool in theory, but so few of them feel fun to play as. The plant, for instance, is unbearably slow, and the snowplow is slippery, making any attempt at platforming an effort in frustration. For those who can ignore the often upsetting control issues in the sparse worlds, then there are collectibles here to occupy you for hours and hours. Between hidden ghost riders that require different techniques to catch, and health and energy upgrades, Yooka-Laylee offers a ton of items to find aside from the pages. But whether you can put up with the rest of the game to find all of them is another question entirely. Yooka-Laylee is one of the worst types of games. You can clearly see elements that could make the game great, but it merely disappoints in the end. Its cruel mix of control issues, empty feeling levels, and lack of its own distinct personality are unfortunate, especially when you consider that when the game isn't being a frustrating mess, its core platforming can be really fun. If you're a really die-hard Banjo-Kazooie fan, then the game's overall presentation will probably give you something to enjoy, but if you're like me and just looking for something to scratch that 90s platformer itch, then Yooka-Laylee simply comes up short. Yooka-Laylee gets a 4 out of 10.